Long before there was a country called Iran, long before people or borders, the land itself was forming. Millions of years ago, much of what is now Iran lay beneath warm, shallow seas. These seas were full of microscopic life, such as algae and plankton. When these organisms died, they sank to the seabed and were buried under layers of sediment. Over immense periods of time, heat and pressure transformed this organic material into oil and gas. At the same time, powerful tectonic forces were reshaping the region. The Arabian Plate slowly pushed northward into the Eurasian Plate. This collision folded the land upward, creating mountain ranges such as the Zagros and the Alborz. These mountains shaped the climate, producing fertile foothills, river valleys, and a high central plateau that was dry but still usable. They also created underground traps where oil accumulated instead of escaping. Humans arrived on this land tens of thousands of years ago. Early hunter-gatherers moved through valleys and mountain foothills, following animals and seasonal plants. The climate was often wetter than today, supporting grasslands and woodland. These people used stone tools, built fires, and lived in caves or temporary shelters. Around 10,000 years ago, life began to change. In parts of western Iran, people started farming. Wheat and barley were grown, sheep and goats were domesticated, and villages appeared. This region became part of one of the world's earliest centers of agriculture. By about 6 to 5,000 years ago, settled communities were widespread. Pottery was produced, metals such as copper and bronze were worked, and trade networks developed. Iranian communities exchanged pottery, stone, metals, and precious stones with neighboring regions. Goods and ideas moved slowly across long distances. Between about 4 and 3,000 years ago, new groups moved gradually into the Iranian plateau from the north and northeast. These Indo-Iranian peoples brought related languages and beliefs. Over time, these languages developed into Iranian languages, and the people of the plateau became known as Iranian peoples. Among these groups were the Persians, who lived in the southwest. Persia was only one region within a much wider Iranian world, but from this region, a powerful empire would soon rise, setting the stage for the next chapter of Iran's history. From the southwest of the Iranian plateau, one Iranian group began to rise above the others. These were the Persians. At first, they were not dominant. They lived alongside other Iranian peoples, including the Medes, who were initially more powerful. But in the 6th century BCE, a Persian leader changed the balance completely. That leader was Cyrus the Great. Cyrus united the Persian tribes and then defeated the Medes, absorbing their kingdom rather than destroying it. From there, expansion accelerated rapidly. Within a few decades, Persian armies had taken Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and territories stretching east toward Central Asia. What emerged was the Achaemenid Empire, the largest empire the world had yet seen. What made this empire remarkable was not only its size, but how it was governed. The Persians ruled over many peoples who were not Persian and did not try to force them to become so. Local religions, customs, and laws were often left in place. Instead of constant terror, the empire relied on administration, organization, and cooperation. The empire was divided into regions, each responsible for taxes and order, but overseen by the central authority. Roads were built to connect distant lands, allowing messages, goods, and armies to move quickly. Trade flourished across enormous distances, linking the Mediterranean world with Central Asia and beyond. Persian kings ruled from ceremonial centers rather than crowded capitals. These centers symbolized unity through diversity, showing representatives of many different peoples bringing tribute, each dressed in their own traditional clothing. This reflected how the empire saw itself. Many cultures held together by Persian rule. Outside the empire, especially in Greece, the entire realm was called Persia because the ruling dynasty came from the Persian homeland. That name became fixed in Western history. But within the empire, the idea of a broader Iranian world already existed. Persians were one Iranian people ruling over many others, including fellow Iranians such as the Medes. The Persian Empire lasted for over 2 centuries. It shaped politics, trade, and governance across much of the ancient world. But no empire is permanent. In the late 4th century BCE, Persian armies were defeated by Alexander the Great, and the empire collapsed. Yet, Persian and Iranian culture did not disappear. Even after conquest, it continued to shape the region. preparing the ground for later Iranian empires and ensuring that Iran's story was far from over. After the fall of the Persian Empire, the Iranian world entered a period of upheaval and adaptation. The man who brought down the empire was Alexander the Great. His victories shattered Persian political power, but they did not erase Iranian culture. When Alexander died young, his empire fragmented, and much of Iran came under the rule of Greek-speaking elites. This period is often called the Hellenistic Age. Greek ideas, language, and art spread among the ruling classes, especially in cities. However, for most people living on the Iranian plateau, everyday life changed far less. Local traditions, languages, and beliefs continued beneath the surface. Over time, Iranian power returned. In the 3rd century BCE, a new Iranian dynasty emerged, the Parthian Empire. The Parthians did not rule in the same tightly organized way as the old Persian Empire. Instead, they governed through a looser system of noble families and regional rulers. The Parthians became famous for their cavalry and their ability to fight Rome to a standstill. For centuries, they controlled a vast territory stretching from Mesopotamia to Central Asia. Iran once again sat at the center of major trade routes linking east and west. Goods such as silk, spices, metals, and luxury items passed through Iranian lands, bringing wealth and influence. In the 3rd century CE, the Parthians were replaced by another Iranian dynasty, the Sasanian Empire. The Sasanians created a strong, centralized state and consciously presented themselves as heirs to the ancient Persian kings. They revived Persian symbols, strengthened administration, and promoted a clear state identity. Under the Sasanians, Iran became one of the great powers of the ancient world. It rivaled Rome and later Byzantium for centuries. Law, art, architecture, and scholarship flourished. Zoroastrian beliefs became closely associated with the state, shaping ideas about order, truth, and authority. This period lasted for over 400 years, but it ended in another dramatic transformation. In the 7th century, Arab Muslim armies defeated the Sasanian state. Political control collapsed and Islam gradually spread across Iran. This was not an instant change. For generations, Iranian traditions continued alongside the new religion. Over time, Persian language and culture adapted and survived within the Islamic world. Iran did not disappear, it changed form. What followed was a long era of invasion, recovery, and cultural endurance, setting the stage for medieval and early modern Iran. After the arrival of Islam, Iran entered a long and complex period of change rather than sudden collapse. Arab rulers now held political power, but Iranian culture did not disappear. Over time, Islam became firmly rooted, yet Persian language, customs, and ways of governing survived and adapted. Persian soon reemerged as a major language of literature, administration, and scholarship across the Islamic world. For centuries, Iran was ruled by a succession of dynasties, many of them Turkic in origin, who adopted Persian culture rather than replacing it. Cities such as Isfahan, Nishapur, and Shiraz became centers of learning, poetry, science, and trade. Iranian scholars, poets, and administrators shaped Islamic civilization far beyond Iran itself. Iran also remained a key crossroads of global trade. Goods moved through its lands from China, India, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Silk, textiles, ceramics, metalwork, and carpets were produced and traded widely. Even when political authority shifted, Iran's cultural influence remained strong. However, this period was not peaceful. From the 11th century onward, waves of invasions struck Iran. The most devastating came in the 13th century with the Mongol invasions. Cities were destroyed, populations were killed or displaced, and irrigation systems collapsed in some regions. The damage was immense. Yet once again, Iran recovered. Over time, Mongol rulers adopted Persian administration and culture. Trade routes were restored and Iranian cities slowly rebuilt. This pattern repeated itself, destruction followed by adaptation and survival. By the early 16th century, Iran was reshaped once more under a new ruling house, the Safavid dynasty. The Safavids created a unified Iranian state that closely resembled modern Iran's core territory. Their most important decision was to make Shia Islam the official religion of the state. This choice had enormous consequences. It sharply distinguished Iran from its Sunni neighbors, especially the Ottoman Empire to the west. It also gave Iran a strong internal identity that combined religion, state power, and Persian culture. Many of Iran's long-term regional rivalries can be traced to this period. Under the Safavids, Iran became a major regional power. Trade expanded, particularly in silk and textiles. Art, architecture, and learning flourished. Cities such as Isfahan became showcases of Iranian culture and state power. But rivalry with neighboring empires and internal pressures gradually weakened the Safavid state. By the 18th century, Iran entered another period of instability, opening the door to new challenges that would reshape its borders, economy, and relationship with the outside world. Those challenges would come not just from neighboring empires, but from a rapidly changing global system dominated by European powers. By the late 18th and 19th centuries, Iran faced a world that was changing rapidly. European powers were expanding, global trade was accelerating, and modern states were beginning to define their borders with maps rather than armies alone. Iran, weakened by internal instability after the Safavids, found itself under increasing pressure from outside powers. To the north, Russia expanded steadily southward. Through wars and unequal treaties, Iran lost large areas of land in the Caucasus. These losses were deeply humiliating and left a lasting scar on Iranian historical memory. To the east, Britain exerted growing influence from India. Britain was less interested in ruling Iran directly and more focused on controlling routes, borders, and buffer zones to protect its empire. As a result, many of Iran's modern borders were not shaped by Iranian choice, but by foreign pressure. Boundaries with Afghanistan and later Pakistan were drawn to suit British strategic needs. In the West, borders with the Ottoman Empire and later Iraq were gradually fixed through agreements that often favored the stronger side. These borders hardened old rivalries and planted seeds of future conflict. At the start of the 20th century, Iran was politically weak, but sitting on a resource that would transform its fate. In 1908, oil was discovered in southwest Iran. This discovery changed everything. Oil had become essential to modern industry, transport, and warfare, and Iran suddenly became strategically vital. Britain moved quickly to secure control over Iranian oil through agreements that heavily favored British interests. Iranian oil fueled British ships and factories, while many Iranians felt their country received little in return. Oil extraction facilities were often run separately from Iranian society, reinforcing a sense of exclusion and injustice. Oil brought money and global attention, but it also brought resentment. For the first time, Iran's wealth was clearly flowing outward on a massive scale. This created a growing nationalist feeling that Iran's resources were being taken without fair compensation. In the 1920s, a new ruler emerged. Reza Shah established the Pahlavi dynasty and set out to modernize Iran rapidly. Railways were built, education expanded, the military strengthened, and the state became more centralized. Iran was reshaped into a modern nation-state. But this transformation came at a cost. Political opposition was suppressed, and power was concentrated at the top. During the Second World War, Iran's strategic importance again became clear. Allied forces occupied the country to secure oil and supply routes, and Reza Shah was forced to step aside. He was replaced by his son, Mohammad Reza Shah. As the world moved into the Cold War, Iran's position became even more significant, setting the stage for deeper involvement by a new global power, the United States. That shift would soon have dramatic consequences for Iran's future. After the Second World War, the balance of power around Iran changed sharply. Britain emerged weakened, while a new global power stepped forward, the United States. As the Cold War took shape, Iran became strategically important, not just for its oil, but for its position bordering the Soviet sphere and controlling access to the Persian Gulf. Inside Iran, political debate intensified. Many Iranians believed their country had never truly benefited from its own resources. This feeling came to a head in the early 1950s with the rise of Mohammad Mossadegh, a nationalist politician who became prime minister through parliamentary support. Mossadegh moved to nationalize Iran's oil industry, arguing that Iran's oil should benefit the Iranian people rather than foreign companies. The decision was enormously popular inside the country. For Britain, it was a direct challenge to long-standing control and economic interest. For the United States, the situation was more complicated. At first, Washington hesitated, but as Cold War tensions deepened, American officials became increasingly concerned that instability in Iran might open the door to Soviet influence. In 1953, Mossadegh was removed from power. The events surrounding his removal remain controversial and are still debated today. It is widely believed that Britain and the United States were involved in encouraging or supporting actions that led to his downfall. What followed, however, is clear. The Shah returned to power with far greater authority than before. From this point onward, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi ruled as the central figure in Iranian politics. Backed strongly by the United States, he pursued rapid modernization. Oil revenues increased sharply, infrastructure expanded, cities grew. The military became one of the most powerful in the region. Iran was presented internationally as a stable, modernizing ally of the West. But internally, tensions grew. Political opposition was tightly controlled. Secret police monitored dissent. Wealth was unevenly distributed, and many Iranians felt excluded from decision-making. Cultural change also created friction. Rapid westernization, especially in urban areas, alienated traditional and religious groups. While the state appeared strong, resentment spread beneath the surface. By the late 1960s and 1970s, Iran was wealthy, heavily armed, and internationally influential. Yet at the same time, public frustration was building. Decades of foreign involvement, unresolved grievances over oil, and political repression were coming together in a way that would soon transform the country once again. The stage was being set for a dramatic turning point. By the late 1970s, pressure inside Iran was reaching breaking point. Despite oil wealth and rapid development, many Iranians felt alienated from the political system. Economic inequality, corruption, censorship, and political repression had built up over decades. At the same time, resentment toward foreign influence, especially from the United States and Britain, remained strong. Opposition to the Shah came from many directions. Religious leaders criticized the erosion of traditional values. Students and intellectuals demanded political freedom. Workers protested economic hardship. These different groups did not always agree with each other, but they shared a growing belief that the existing system could not continue. In 1978, mass protests spread across the country. Demonstrations were met with force, which only intensified public anger. Strikes paralyzed key industries, including the oil sector, cutting off the government's main source of revenue. The state began to lose control of events on the ground. By early 1979, the situation had become unsustainable. The Shah left the country, officially for medical reasons, but in reality because he could no longer govern. Shortly afterwards, the monarchy collapsed. Power shifted rapidly as revolutionary forces took control. A central figure in this moment was Ruhollah Khomeini, a religious leader who had spent years in exile. He returned to Iran to enormous crowds and quickly emerged as the dominant authority within the revolutionary movement. Later in 1979, Iran was declared an Islamic republic following a national referendum. The new political system combined elected institutions with religious authority, placing ultimate power in the hands of the supreme leader. This marked a complete break with Iran's previous political order. Relations with the United States and Britain collapsed almost immediately. The storming of the U.S. embassy in Tehran and the hostage crisis that followed symbolized the depth of mistrust and hostility. Diplomatic ties were severed, and Iran entered a period of international isolation. Internally, the new regime moved quickly to consolidate power. Political rivals were sidelined or eliminated. Revolutionary institutions were created to protect the new system. Iranian society was reshaped according to new religious and ideological rules. For many Iranians, the revolution represented independence, dignity, and freedom from foreign control. For others, it marked the beginning of new forms of restriction and uncertainty. What was clear, however, was that Iran had entered an entirely new phase of its history. Almost immediately, this new state would be tested in the most severe way possible, not through diplomacy or reform, but through war. Only a year after the revolution, Iran was drawn into one of the most destructive conflicts in its modern history. In September 1980, Iraq launched a full-scale invasion of Iran under the leadership of Saddam Hussein. The war that followed would last 8 years and leave deep scars on both countries. Several forces drove Iraq's decision to attack. There were long-standing disputes over the western border, especially control of the Shatt al-Arab waterway, which both sides considered vital for access to the Persian Gulf. Saddam Hussein also feared that Iran's Islamic revolution might spread across the region and inspire rebellion among Iraq's own Shia population. Iran, weakened by revolution and internal purges, appeared vulnerable. At first, Iraq expected a quick victory. That did not happen. Iranian resistance was fierce, and the conflict soon turned into a brutal stalemate. Trench warfare, missile strikes, and bombardment of cities became common. Oil facilities and tankers were targeted, pulling the wider world into the conflict through energy markets. Foreign involvement was extensive, though often indirect. Iraq received weapons, intelligence, and financial support from several countries. France supplied aircraft and missiles. The Soviet Union provided arms and equipment. Gulf states gave Iraq large amounts of money. Chemical weapons were used repeatedly by Iraqi forces, causing horrific casualties. Iran, meanwhile, was largely isolated. Sanctions and hostility from the West left it short of weapons and spare parts. To compensate, Iran relied heavily on manpower, mobilizing large numbers of volunteers. At the same time, weapons reached Iran through secretive channels. In the mid 1980s, it emerged that American weapons had been sold indirectly to Iran at inflated prices, even while the United States officially opposed the Iranian government. The human cost of the war was enormous. Estimates vary, but most historians believe between 500,000 and 1 million people were killed. Millions more were wounded or displaced. Entire towns were destroyed, and a generation grew up shaped by war. By 1988, both countries were exhausted. Neither side had achieved its goals. Borders remained essentially unchanged. Iran eventually accepted a United Nations ceasefire, bringing the conflict to an end without a clear winner. For Iran, the war became a defining national trauma. It strengthened the state's security institutions, deepened distrust of foreign powers, and reinforced a sense of permanent siege. The experience would shape Iranian politics, society, and foreign policy for decades to come. After the Iran-Iraq War ended in 1988, Iran faced a country exhausted by conflict. Cities lay damaged, the economy was under severe strain, and hundreds of thousands of families were dealing with loss and trauma. The immediate priority became survival and reconstruction, rather than expansion or ideology. During the 1990s, Iran attempted to rebuild its economy and infrastructure. At the same time, the political system created after the revolution settled into a more stable but tightly controlled form. Ultimate authority rested with the supreme leader, while elected governments operated within clear limits. Debates emerged inside Iran about how open the country should be to the outside world and how much reform was possible. Relations with the United States and Britain remained hostile. Sanctions continued to restrict Iran's economy, limiting access to international markets and technology. These pressures reinforced Iran's sense of isolation and encouraged a strategy of self-reliance. At the same time, Iran began strengthening relationships outside the Western sphere. Um, One of the most important was with Russia. This connection was not based on deep trust, but on shared interests. Both countries opposed Western dominance, both faced sanctions or pressure, and both saw cooperation as a way to protect their independence. Russia supplied Iran with military equipment, energy technology, and diplomatic support, while Iran offered regional influence and strategic alignment. Into the early 2000s, Iran's role in the Middle East grew more complex. The U.S. invasion of Iraq removed a hostile neighbor, but also brought American forces close to Iran's borders. Iran expanded its influence through regional alliances, while at home, economic pressure and social frustration continued to grow. Inside Iran, periodic waves of protest appeared. In 2009, disputed election results triggered mass demonstrations. Although the state retained control, these protests revealed deep divisions within society. Over the following decade, further unrest emerged, driven less by ideology and more by everyday concerns: jobs, inflation, corruption, and living standards. By the late 2010s, protests in 2017 and 2019 showed a shift. Demonstrations spread beyond major cities into smaller towns, reflecting widespread dissatisfaction. The government responded with force, internet shutdowns, and arrests, restoring order but not resolving the underlying problems. Iran entered the 2020s facing multiple pressures at once: economic sanctions, a young and connected population, regional rivalry, and declining trust between state and society. Yet Iran remained resilient. Its political system endured, its regional influence persisted. Its long history of survival shaped how both leaders and citizens viewed the future. As Iran moved toward the mid 2020s, the tension between stability and change became sharper than ever. What came next would depend not only on politics, but on economics, identity, and the weight of history itself. By the early 2020s, pressure inside Iran had become increasingly visible. Years of economic sanctions, high inflation, unemployment, and a falling currency were felt most sharply by ordinary people. At the same time, a younger generation, more connected to the outside world than any before it, was growing increasingly frustrated with social restrictions and political limits. In 2022, nationwide protests erupted after the death of a young woman in police custody. What began as anger over social control quickly widened into broader demands for dignity, accountability, and change. Demonstrations spread across cities and towns, involving many different groups. The state responded with force, arrests, and strict control of communications. The protests eventually subsided, but they left a clear mark. They showed that dissatisfaction was deep, widespread, and no longer limited to one issue. Through 2023 and 2024, economic pressure continued. By 2025, unrest returned again, this time driven strongly by everyday conditions. Rising food prices, fuel costs, water shortages, and power cuts became flashpoints. Protests broke out in many parts of the country, sometimes led by workers, sometimes by students, sometimes by local communities struggling with basic services. By late 2025 and into 2026, demonstrations became more frequent and more openly critical of the political system itself. The government again relied on security forces, internet restrictions, and arrests to regain control. Order was restored, but the underlying problems remained unresolved. Iran, at this point, stands in a familiar but dangerous position. It is not collapsing, but it is under strain. Its political system remains intact. Its security institutions are strong. Its regional influence continues. Yet trust between large parts of society and the state has been badly eroded. Looking forward, there are several broad paths Iran could take. One possibility is continued containment. The state maintains control through security and limited economic adjustment, preventing major change while avoiding total breakdown. Another possibility is managed reform. Gradual changes ease pressure, offering limited openings while keeping the core system intact. This could stabilize the country without dramatic transformation. A third possibility is fragmentation. If economic conditions worsen and unrest continues, authority could weaken unevenly, creating instability and regional tension. The most dramatic possibility is structural change, a transformation of the political system itself. This outcome is uncertain and risky, but history shows that sustained pressure can sometimes lead to unexpected shifts. Iran's story, from ancient land to modern state, has never been simple. It is a history of adaptation, resilience, pride, and conflict. Whatever comes next will not erase that past. It will be shaped by it. Historical disclaimer: this account is a general historical narrative based on widely accepted research, interpretation, and synthesis of many sources. History is complex. Some events remain debated, some interpretations differ. This series is intended to inform and explain, not to claim absolute or final truth.
Thank you for listening. If you like my channel, please share, like, and subscribe.